Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, I'd like to tell you about a very fun subject, namely the Epaulette mates. The Epaulette mates are a special kind of mate where the king is surrounded on each side with one of his own pieces, and that causes the trouble. Let me show you the first example on what I mean. Here we go. This is a very simple example where white in fact can checkmate in just one move. Finding the right move, the black king will have no way out because he has two rooks on each side of the king. And here it comes, the queen moving right in front of the king and taking away the other potential escape squares. Checkmate. Let's see another example on the same theme. Here we go. In this position, there are more pieces on the board, but we have largely the same theme. Again, the black king on f6 has two of his own pieces on the side, taking away potentially those squares to run from a check. The difference between this position and the previous one is that it's not the back rank that limits the black king, but it's the white rook on a7 that doesn't let the king run back to the 7th rank. So here, as long as white finds the right attack on the black king, again the black king will be in an immediate checkmate. So the check needs to come in a way where it not only attacks the king, but will also attack these three squares where right now the black king could run out too. And that check is moving the queen to f4. Checkmate. Let's move on. Here we go. In this position, again, the black king has two pieces on the side. But black is a whole bishop up. Shouldn't black be winning here? Normally they should, indeed. But here, white has an opportunity to give another Epaulette checkmate. When we're looking for an opportunity to checkmate, it means we don't only need to attack the opponent's king, but we need to take away all the squares where the king currently could move to. And these are all those four highlighted squares by green. For example, giving a check on a7 wouldn't do anything. It's only a check, and the black king could, for example, escape on g6. Naturally, giving a check on f4 would be a horrible idea because the black queen would capture the white queen. On the other hand, thanks to the support of white's pawn on h6, it's completely safe and good to go to g7 with the queen, which not only attacks the black king, but takes away all of those four important potential escape squares from black's king. Again, the result is checkmate. And finally, let's see one more simple example of checkmate in one on the same theme. These type of checkmates happen quite frequently. In this position, black has an extra knight, but because white has a pawn on f5 supporting white's idea of playing queen to e6, white can immediately announce checkmate again. Please try to remember these checkmate ideas. They can come in very handy in your own games as well. Now we'll move on to a bit more complex ideas on how to make these ideas reality. When it's not right there, it's not immediate, it's not a one-move checkmate, but you need to create your own fortune. Here we go. Well, in this position, it is black's turn. White, on the other hand, has an extra bishop, although black has 2 pawns as compensation. But nevertheless, materially speaking, white is ahead. In this position, we can see how nice it would be if our queen from g8 could jump over the rook and move to b3. But of course we know that's impossible. The queen cannot jump over pieces. The knight is the only piece that's able to jump over any piece. So what to do? How could we still hope to get our queen to b3? Let's look at a move, for example, like rook to c2, that opens up the diagonal, and now black indeed would threaten with a deadly move, moving the queen to b3 to attack white's king. The problem is in such situations that it's too slow. It gives your opponent the time to defend against it or even counterattack. Like in this case, the simplest and best choice for white would be to exchange the queens, and in fact, black would be in serious trouble now because black's rook on c8 is overworked. And if the black rook now captures the white queen, black will lose the rook on c2. Okay, so rook to c2 did not work. How about moving the queen away, let's say to a square like f8, with the idea to then come to f3 and b3? Well, that's too slow again. Gives white the opportunity to, for example, play queen f7 or other moves. So what black needs to do is black needs to make a very forceful move. As we know, forceful moves typically are moves that involve a check or a capture. And in fact, in this case, black is able to get rid of his rook by gaining a tempo by capturing white's bishop with a check. That means white has no choice. White needs to react to this check. If white would not capture the rook on c1 with his own rook, but would move out his king to b2, black would be ready to checkmate right away in one move by bringing his second rook up to c2, and the king cannot go further up to b3 because the black queen is controlling that square. But what happens when the white rook captures the back rook? Well, then here we are, exactly our pattern, the epaulette mate with the 2 rooks on the side of the king, and here we are, checkmate. Beautiful solution. Now let's see a simple example on this same theme. Here we are. In this position, it is black's turn again. The material is roughly balanced. White is perhaps a tiny bit ahead because white has 2 rooks against the queen, in addition to each side having a pair of bishops. Black has a number of checks to give, but only one of them does the job to win the game. Again, you see 2 rooks for white, kind of inviting the king to step in between so black could give a checkmate. Of course, sometimes dreaming is not useful or unrealistic, but many times if you dream, that's the first step in creating an idea and trying to accomplish it. So actually, knowing patterns and trying to make them happen is a good thing. And as you get more experienced, you'll find that balance on when is it worth trying to make something happen, and when to recognize that, well, the idea is nice, but in this particular case, we are unable to make it work. Nevertheless, it's quite important to be familiar with many ideas, and as you get more and more experienced, you'll find that you'll have the intuition, the sense to figure out what time should you look for which button. So in this case, as we always say, first look at the forceful moves. Black is able to force the white king into an unfortunate square. After this check with queen to d3, black has only one possible move, moving to f2, and now we can already see what's happening, namely the black queen checkmates on f3. A beautiful checkmate. Very, very typical. After all these positions, now let's see a full game. A little short game where white is using the same pattern. Here we go. White started with e4 and black responded with a very common answer, e5, the king pawn openings, knight f3. In this position, black's most common move would be to protect that pawn on e5 by playing knight to c6. But in this game, black continued by protecting the pawn in a different way, namely by the pawn from d7 to d6. This is called Philidor's defense. Philidor was one of the great chess players many years ago. He was also famous not just being a great chess player, but also a very famous composer of music. And white played right now bishop to c4, a normal developing move. Black played bishop to e7 with the idea to avoid any kind of tricks that could arise after knight f6, which is the most natural looking move, because then white can have a strong attack after an immediate knight g5 and attacking the pawn a second time, knight and bishop, and black would have serious difficulties in avoiding losing material. So therefore, black played bishop e7, which is a good response, and white immediately fought for the center squares by playing d4, attacking black's e5 pawn a second time. Now black either needs to trade pawns or protect the pawn. Black chose the former and traded on d4. White naturally recaptures with a knight, not with the queen. Typically, in the early stages of the game, we rarely want to bring out the queen voluntarily. And here black already made a losing move. What do you think black should play here? Well, following the basic opening principles, black should play here knight to f6. The reason being, not only that black develops a piece, it develops a piece towards the center, controlling two important center squares, as well as preparing to castle to the king side. Instead, black played knight d7, which is a relatively natural looking move as well. It also develops, it controls at least one center square, okay, not two, but at least one. And the only other drawback it has compared to the other knight development is that it does not prepare castling immediately. And this is one of those opening traps that it's worth remembering. White immediately sacrificed the bishop on f7. This is why it's being believed that the weakest point in a chess game, in the beginning of a chess game, is the f7 square for black and the f2 for white. Of course, if the black king now does not capture the bishop, but would move out to f8, white would simply give a fork by knight e6 check. But what happens if indeed black does capture the bishop? Well, the most natural moves, such as queen h5 or queen f3 check, are not the best solutions, because now black would be able to block the check. Because now, after g6, queen d5 check, king e8, even though it seems that white can trap black's queen by knight e6, which is true, but the problem is that black can rescue himself by playing knight b6 and counterattack. And even though white can capture black's queen, black will capture white's queen, and black will be just fine. Giving an intermediate check will not bring the desired results either, because black again will counterattack. Quite a nice trap. So therefore, in this position, queen h5 doesn't do the job, neither does queen to f3. Black could block the check again by blocking with the knight, making sure the e6 square is controlled by the bishop. So what should white do then, if neither of these queen checks work? Why did we indeed sacrifice the bishop? Well, here the key move was to play knight to e6, a very fancy move. And of course here black should not capture the knight, but better to move the queen, although after queen e8, white is better as well. For example, after a fork with knight c7. But after king e6, we'll again find our Epaulette checkmate, namely queen d5 check, king to f6, and here we are. We see our typical pattern between the two black pieces being on both sides of the king and the white queen checkmates in the middle. After this cute little game, let's see another example on how to give an Epaulette checkmate. Well, hopefully you're getting the idea here. Black already has the queen, the bishop on the two sides of the king. The white queen is rather near the black king. White has a supporter, a pawn on d5. So if white could play queen takes pawn on e6 without the black pawn from f7 capturing it, that would be what we're looking for. And in this case, white has a very pretty move by simply giving a check, which is almost checkmate already. But black can block the check, but at the cost that now the pawn no longer is on f7 to guard the pawn on e6. And now white is ready to checkmate by queen takes pawn. Again, the Epaulette checkmate. Let's move on to slightly different versions of the Epaulette checkmate, when actually the checkmate is being given by a different piece than the queen. Here we go. In this position, black has a rather huge material advantage, having his queen still on the board, while white doesn't. All white has as compensation is a knight and two pawns. In addition, to make things even worse, black is about to checkmate white by capturing the pawn on g2 with either the queen or the rook. So what can white do? Well, white may give some checks with the knight, for example. but the black king will run away. That's not the right idea. But you may say, black doesn't yet have 2 pieces on the king's side, like we saw in the previous Epaulette mates. That's very true, and that's exactly what we need to achieve here. Therefore, the correct move is to give up our rook on f8 with a check. Pull the rook away from g8, and not just pulling it away so the rook no longer threatens with checkmate, but more importantly, it took away that important square from the black king, as well as no longer guarding the g7 square. And now the white knight is ready to move to g7, announcing checkmate. Very elegant. Here, of course, there is another key piece, the rook on the 7th rank, not allowing the black king to escape. Remember this pattern. Very beautiful. In this last position, black is a whole piece up. Nevertheless, white can win the game. In order to do that, white must make forceful moves before black can defend himself. White can start to attack the black king in 2 different ways. White can check the black king with either rook, but only one of them works. It's very important to remember that when you give a check, it is only one of potentially 3 options of your opponent to move their king. Therefore, it would be a major mistake to give a check with the rook on e7, because here, in addition to moving the king out, when indeed white could give checkmate with Epaulette mate, instead black could also block the check with either the rook or the knight. In contrast to if white starts the check with the other rook, black has no choice but moving the king, allowing the checkmate on c7. Well, I hope you learned something new in the Epaulette mates. It's very pretty, one of my favorite types of checkmates, and hope you can use them in your own games. And of course, avoid getting such mates yourself. Well, thanks for listening, and hope you'll be back next week. Bye-bye.